Margaret Catherine Bennett had always believed that love would find a way even when the path seemed impossible. She stood in the ornate ballroom of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, wearing her grandmother's pearl earrings and a simple ivory dress that had belonged to her mother decades before. The chandelier cast warm golden light across the marble floors, and for a moment, she felt like she was living in one of those old movies her parents used to watch together on Sunday afternoons at 58. Margaret had learned that second chances could come at any age. She had been a widow for 12 years, raising her daughter Sarah alone, while building her small but successful catering business from nothing but determination and her grandmother's recipe collection. The business had grown slowly and steadily, serving the kind of wholesome comfort food that reminded people of Sunday dinners and family gatherings. Now at an age when many people were thinking about retirement, Margaret found herself falling in love again. Thomas William Harrison was 71 with silver hair that caught the light and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He had been a widower for 8 years and had spent those years focusing entirely on Harrison Industries, the manufacturing company his father had started in 1952. Thomas was what people called old-fashioned in the best possible way. He opened doors and pulled out chairs and still believed that a handwritten note meant more than any text message could ever convey. They had met at the farmer's market on a crisp October morning when Margaret was selecting apples for her famous cinnamon apple bread. Thomas had been standing nearby looking somewhat lost with a shopping list his housekeeper had written. In neat cursive handwriting, Margaret had noticed him studying the different varieties of apples, with the same concentration most people reserved for important business decisions. She had approached him with the kind of gentle kindness that came naturally to her after years of nurturing others and offered to help him find what he was looking for. They spent the next hour walking through the market, talking about everything from the best way to store fresh herbs to their shared love of old jazz music. By the time they parted ways, Thomas had invited her to dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown, and Margaret had said yes with a smile that made her feel 20 years younger. Their courtship had been wonderfully traditional. Thomas brought her flowers every Friday afternoon, white roses that reminded him of the ones his mother had grown in their garden when he was a boy. They took long walks through the park, feeding the ducks and talking about their children, their dreams, and the lessons life had taught them. Margaret cooked for him on Sunday evenings, serving meals at her small kitchen table, while they listened to the radio and talked until the stars came out. After 18 months of quiet contentment, Thomas had proposed on Christmas morning, presenting Margaret with his grandmother's engagement ring, a simple band with a modest diamond that caught the morning light streaming through her kitchen window. He had gotten down on one knee right there beside her breakfast table and asked if she would do him the honor of becoming his wife. Margaret had said yes through happy tears, and they had spent the morning calling their children with the news. The wedding planning had been simple and joyful. Margaret wanted something small and meaningful, just family and close friends gathering to witness their commitment to each other. Thomas agreed, completely preferring intimate celebration to elaborate display. They chose the Grand Metropolitan Hotel because it was where Thomas had proposed to his first wife 45 years earlier, and because Margaret loved the way the afternoon light filled the ballroom. But as their wedding day approached, clouds began to gather. Thomas's adult children had not taken the news of their father's engagement, while his son Robert, who was 48 and executive vice president of Harrison Industries, had made his disapproval clear from the very beginning. He saw Margaret as an opportunist, someone who was after his father's money and position. Robert's sister Patricia, who was 45 and lived in California, had been only slightly more polite, but her concerns were obvious to everyone. Margaret tried to understand their perspective. She knew how difficult it could be for adult children to accept a parent's new relationship, especially when that parent was wealthy, and the new partner came from modest circumstances. She had encouraged Thomas to be patient with Robert and Patricia, to give them time to adjust to the idea. But as the wedding day drew closer, it became clear that acceptance was not coming. The morning of the wedding, Margaret felt a mixture of joy and apprehension. She had woken early in her small apartment above her catering business and spent time looking through old photo albums, remembering her first wedding 35 years earlier, and thinking about how different her life looked now. Her daughter Sarah had come over to help her get ready, bringing coffee from Margaret's favorite cafe and filling the room with cheerful chatter. Sarah was 32 and worked as a teacher at the local elementary school. She had been the light of Margaret's life through all the difficult years after her father's death. And now she was Margaret's strongest supporter in this new chapter. Sarah believed that her mother deserved happiness and love at any age, and she had grown genuinely fond of Thomas over the past year and a half. As Margaret put on her dress, she thought about the conversation she had with Thomas the night before. He had seemed worried about something, but when she asked, he had simply said that he loved her and wanted their wedding day to be perfect. Margaret had reassured him that as long as they were together, everything would be perfect. She meant those words with all her heart. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the afternoon, with a reception to follow in the same ballroom. Margaret had chosen to keep everything simple and elegant, with white roses and baby's breath decorating the space. The guest list was small, about 40 people, including family members, close friends, and a few business associates of Thomas's. When Margaret arrived at the hotel that afternoon, she felt beautiful and confident in a way she hadn't experienced in many years. The ivory dress fit perfectly, and her hair was styled in a soft updo that made her feel both elegant and comfortable. She carried a small bouquet of white roses and wore the pearl necklace that had been her mother's wedding gift all those years ago. The ceremony began beautifully with Margaret walking down the aisle to meet Thomas at the altar. He looked handsome in his dark suit with a white rose in his lapel, and when their eyes met, Margaret felt her heart fill with gratitude for this unexpected second chance at love. The minister spoke about the blessing of finding companionship later in life and the wisdom that comes with age and experience. But as they were exchanging vows, Margaret noticed a disturbance at the back of the room. Robert Harrison had arrived late and was speaking in urgent whispers to several other guests. Margaret tried to focus on Thomas's words as he promised to love and cherish her for the rest of their days, but she could feel tension building in the room, like the pressure before a storm. After they were pronounced husband and wife and had shared their first kiss as a married couple, the trouble began in earnest. As the guests moved toward the reception area, Robert approached the front of the room with a determined expression that made Margaret's stomach clench with dread. He was carrying a folder of papers and had the look of a man on a mission. Thomas immediately stepped forward to speak with his son, but Robert brushed past him and headed straight for the large screen that had been set up to display wedding photos. Instead, he connected his laptop, and suddenly the screen filled with a stark presentation slide that read, "Hale Group $950 million contract terminated." The room fell silent as everyone turned to stare at the screen. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face as she realized what was happening. Robert was using her wedding reception to make some kind of business announcement. Margaret looked at Thomas, who appeared shocked and confused by his son's actions. Robert cleared his throat and spoke in a voice that carried clearly across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I have an important announcement to make regarding Harrison Industries. As of today, we are terminating our partnership with the Hale Group, a decision that will cost us approximately $950 million in lost revenue." Margaret heard gasps from the wedding guests and felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She didn't understand what was happening or why Robert had chosen this moment to make such a dramatic business announcement. Thomas looked devastated and angry as he approached his son, demanding to know what he was doing. Robert continued speaking, his voice growing louder and more confrontational. "This decision comes in response to recent changes in our company's leadership structure. Changes that I believe compromise our ability to maintain the professional standards our clients expect." His eyes moved deliberately to Margaret as he spoke, making his meaning clear to everyone in the room. Margaret felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. She realized that Robert was somehow connecting his father's marriage to her with this massive business decision. She could feel all eyes turning toward her and saw the confusion and judgment on many faces. Thomas was now speaking angrily to Robert, but she couldn't make out the words over the buzzing in her ears. Patricia Harrison stepped forward from the crowd, looking uncomfortable, but determined. She approached Margaret with a F